Okay, so what we're going to do today, finally, and again, thank you for bearing with me, is we're going to take a look at the introduction to statistics. Specifically, this is going to be our first look at new content in statistics. So what we'll be doing today is we're going to start off with a MyLab overview, just so that everybody is on the same page when it comes to MyLab. Then we're going to take care of all the new math that you're going to need this semester. So we're going to take a look at summation notation. We'll take a look at order of operations, and then we'll have some time devoted to practice afterwards. So let's start off with that MyLab. So this is what your homepage in Canvas kind of looks like. See if I can. Nope. Lovely. All right, so this is what your navigation page looks like. So you can reach everything that you need in terms of MyLab from your Canvas sign-in. So you'll want to go to, for example, homework. To do homework, you can go to the course home. That'll take you to your general landing page, My Statistics Study Plan, Quizzes and Tests, your e-text right there. So that's how you access your MyLab resources. And when you're in there, you will see basically, this will be your dashboard. This is like your home page. It'll have planned out for you what it is that is upcoming. So I've imported all the assignments. They're all live right now. So you actually can do the assignments at any time that you want, but they need to be done prior to the due date. So feel free, to work on them, visit them, check them out. This is the way that you access those assignments. So this is where you access your pre-tests, where you access your homework, where you access your post-test. There are only 2 homework assignments that are Excel sheet assignments, which I will be posting into Canvas, and I'll let you know when those are upcoming. Everything else is now available for you to look at and explore. So you can go to your course home. Again, it'll list everything that's available. There's multiple ways that it represents things that are due and when they're due. So, explore that. You'll see different symbols when things are available. The little clock there tells you when things are due. So poke around, take a look at your pretest, for example, and you'll see the kind of questions that will be asked. Follow when you're doing your pretest, when you're doing your homework. Make sure that you follow the instructions very carefully. What I mean by this is one thing that I love StatLab. I love the immediacy of its feedback. I love the fact that as soon as you put in an answer, it will let you know whether you got it correctly, done it correctly or not. So I love that aspect of my StatLab. I'm very much love using it. I find that it increases the learning outcomes for my students. However, it does have some idiosyncrasies. One of those being it will oftentimes ask you for a certain number of decimal places. And even if it's 0.00, please put in those decimal places. So don't be getting things wrong for these little idiosyncrasies. Make sure that you follow those directions. It'll tell you up to 2 decimal places. Make sure that if it says that, you do use that information. So your input is incorrect. It'll give you your score. You also have access to your homework in MyLab. The great thing about it is if you do it incorrectly, it will give you some information about what you're doing incorrectly, try to help you along with your homework. It ties into the textbook as well, so you can follow along in your text. And basically, MyLab is going to be where we're going to be doing most of, again, the pre-test, post-test homework assignments in this course. So that being said, make sure that you're exploring MyLab, make sure that it's working on the computer that you're using. And our first homework assignment is going to be the MyMathLab tutorial, and that's going to be due Monday, January 14th by midnight. So 11:59 on Monday, January 14th, midnight before we meet, before the day that we meet in class. Now, this will be your sort of intro into my stat lab or my math lab. There is a ton of features in MyLab which you can explore, which we will not be incorporating into this course. We can't throw everything at you, but feel free to kind of poke around, see what it has there for you. One thing, though, that I want to make sure that everybody's clear on is the requirements for each assignment. So for the homework assignment, there's an option to limit the number of times you can attempt each question. I did not choose that option. So for your homework, you have unlimited attempts to try to get the answer correct. All right, so it will oftentimes update the question, or oftentimes change the question, like change the numbers on you, because it is a stats, based question. But if you get a question wrong, feel free to go back and do it again. This is, again, that idea of practicing over and over and over again. This isn't just a one-time thing. If you get it wrong, oh no. This is, if you get it wrong, try it again. If you get it wrong, try it again. If it's wrong the third time, try it again. Come by my office hour. We'll talk about it. But you have multiple attempts for your homework. We also have our first pretest coming up due, and that is a Chapter 1 pretest that is due Monday, January 14th, again at 11:59 p.m. And once again, for the pretest, just so that you know, the settings for the pretest and for the post-test as well, these are just the settings for tests. The important thing, once again, is that you have unlimited attempts on your pretest and your post-test. So, if you get something wrong, give it another try, give it another go. And you also have the save for later option. So you do not have to do these tests in a single sitting. So if you, want to set aside, if you think to yourself, oh, I'm going to need half an hour for this pretest, and you have 15 minutes now, feel free to start half of it, save it for later, come back again. You have that option in your pretest. So those I want you to be aware of. Unlimited attempts for the homework and the pretest, save for later for the pretest. Homework also has that save for later feature, and it will be graded at the deadline for both of these pretest, post-test, and homework. All right, one other thing to be sure to do in my lab is to know your due dates. So the due dates are listed there. The due dates are listed in the syllabus as well. And please be aware of your due dates. The reason for that is that the due dates are very inflexible because these, the pretest and the post-test, they get graded at the deadline. The correct answers get posted at the deadline, so we cannot reopen that for students. And I am hoping to go a full semester without a student missing a pretest because they got the wrong due date. So keep these due dates, know your due dates. You're responsible for that. They are clearly laid out in MyLab. They're clearly laid out in the syllabus. So please do not miss out on those points. Do not miss out on the practice opportunity for the simple reason of, mistakenly missing a due date. So again, it's in multiple places. Know your due dates. Know when things need to be completed. All right, so that's our first experience with MyLab. So do the tutorial, do the pretest, and that is what we're going to be using for the majority of, again, the homework assignments and for all the pretests and the post-tests. All right, so next we're going to start talking about ninjas. So this is a metaphor that I use in this course. And the reason I use this is because ninjas, if you're familiar with Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe, you'll know that a ninja is the character that you call upon for help, and you know that regardless of the situation that you throw them into, they will be successful. They will be able to get results. So ninjas are those feared, characters where when things go south, you call in Snake Eyes and you know that things are going to go well. The reason I use this metaphor is because this is where we're actually going to try to get you in this statistics course. So statistics and knowing statistics as a psychologist is much like having those ninja skills as part of G.I. Joe. So the most valued, I'll say it the way I want to say it. The most valued asset that we have in our faculty is Dr. Fujita, because his statistics knowledge is basically ninja level. So, I know a bunch of statistics, everybody else knows a bunch of statistics, but every once in a while, things will be weird, right? We'll get a data set, and because humans are just weird, wonderful creatures, our data will look weird, and we'll take a look at it and say, I know the skills that I have as a statistician will not handle this data. I'm going to call in my ninja, I'm going to call in Dr. Fujita, and he comes in and saves the day. So keep this in mind. This is where you're kind of building towards. We're building towards the cool things that you probably think statistics is all about. So we are eventually going to get to the point where we are doing massively interesting, cool stuff, much like ninjas do massively interesting, cool things. So this is better with volume, but clearly it's not on there right now. All right, so anyways, I'll just talk over it then. So this is what it's going to be like once we finally get to the back half of the course. So you were probably thinking when you came in here, we're going to be looking at psychological experiments. We're going to be looking at psychology data. We're going to be looking at different studies that were done, and how can you tell the difference between these two? How can you tell what the implications of this are? And we're going to do that. We're going to be looking at actual psychology studies at some point. However, that's what we're going to get to when we get to this point. So this little move here is going to be like doing a t-test, right? This little move here is going to be like doing an ANOVA. That guy did not practice enough, so make sure you're doing your practice. But we will eventually get to this point. We will eventually get to the cool stuff that you probably thought we were going to do when you enrolled in this course, that you probably think that we as psychologists do when we do statistics. And yes, that is what we do when we do statistics. It's the equivalent of backflips and high wire fighting. But we're not quite there yet. So where are we? Well, for this, I am going to need some volume for this next one. Oh my gosh, and I don't think we have volume at this room. All right, I've seen this clip enough. I think I can handle it. We'll see. All right, I promised when they gave me this room that I would be able to improvise, and they're going to put me to the test. This is where you are right now. This is where we are currently at. All right, so when you think about how you're going to do, I want you to picture in your mind that you are Daniel from the Karate Kid, and I'm going to be your Mr. Miyagi. And for those of you that don't recognize this film, I highly recommend check it out. But Daniel is basically being bullied. Mr. Miyagi saved him from his bullies, and now Mr. Miyagi told him that he's going to teach him karate. So this is their first meeting. It's better with sound, but I'll do my best. So he's sitting him down, and Mr. Miyagi says, I'm going to teach. You're going to listen. Are you ready to do it? And Daniel says, sort of. And he goes, no. He goes, statistics. I'm going to say, statistics is like walking down a road. You walk on left side, okay. You walk on right side, okay. You walk down center, squish, like grape. That's what statistics is like. So I will teach you statistics. And if you walk on the right side and you do your practice, you do your homework, you do your pre-test, you do your post-test, you come into class, you do the practice in class, you call me over when you need help, you will be okay if you're walking on the right side of the road. If you want to walk on the left side of the road, right, that's dropping the class. If you decide, not this semester, maybe I'll do it another semester, that's fine as well, no judgment, right? Different paths for different students. But if you kind of do statistics, if you kind of, do what I ask, if you finish some of the practice, if you skip a couple of pre-tests, if you, don't call me over when Z-scores come along and you're like, I'll just kind of pass on that. That's when you have that horrible experience. So either commit to the full package or, don't commit to any of the package, but definitely do not do statistics halfway, because that's when it's going to go south. So what happens with Daniel here? Well, he promises to teach him. So I say you do, no questions asked. So Daniel says yes, okay. And they're going to do their first karate lesson. And his first karate lesson is coming up. Yeah, he's ready to start. And he goes, good. First lesson, wash all these cars. You're going to wash all the cars. And he's like, yeah, but I want to do this. Like, no, 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 no. Don't talk. I teach, you listen. That is agreement. Don't talk again. So he goes, wash all the cars. And you're going to wax on with the right hand. You're going to wax off with the left hand. Wax on, wax off. Concentrate, breathe in through nose, out through mouth. Concentrate, wax on, wax off. Very important, breathing. Wax on, wax off. All right, so he's got to wax on and he's got to wax off all these cars. Where'd you get them from? Detroit. Wax on, wax off. And he's got to do it, and there are tens of cars that he has to do. So he starts cleaning, he starts working on it. He's still working on it. But notice he's not following directions. Notice he's not doing it correctly. Mr. Miyagi comes back and he's like, no, 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 no. Wax on, right hand, wax off, left hand. Big circle, big circles. Make sure that you're doing those big circles. So why do I show you this clip? I show you this clip because that is exactly what we're going to be doing in the first half of this course. So while we will eventually get to the cool things, right? While we will eventually get to things like, oh, in this psychology study, here's this data. What does this mean about the effects of obesity on later IQ levels? We'll get to that. We'll get to the cool stuff. But we're going to start with the basics. We're going to start with the fundamentals. So you're going to start with wax on and wax off. You're going to start with sanding the floor. You're going to start with painting the fence. And occasionally it's going to be a Friday night when you're working on your homework and your friends are going to say, can you come out? And you're going to say, no, I'm painting the fence for my statistics instructor. And you're going to do this over and over again. So this is an entire system that I put together. So you're going to pre-test on, pre-test off. You're going to in-class practice on. You're going to extra practice on. You're going to post-test on. You're going to homework on. And again, do this on the right side of the road. Commit to it. Success. Do it on the left side of the road. Decide that a guy that shows you Karate Kid in your second class is a little too weird and you don't want to take statistics with me. Fine. Fine as well. No judgment. Do it half. It's going to be a disaster. So make sure that you commit to the full process, because eventually what we're going to do is we're going to get this, and this is the key here. We want to get your early fundamental skills to the point where they're automatic, to the point where you see something and you kind of automatically react to it. So what we want to do is we want to eventually get you to the point that Daniel gets to after all that practice, and that's this point right here. So at this, just kind of set up in context, at this point, Daniel's been waxing the cars. He's been sanding the floor. He's been painting the house. And they haven't done any interesting stuff. No karate stuff. No interesting things. They haven't done anything that looks like interesting statistics yet. So he finally gets angry at Mr. Miyagi. He gets to this point, and Mr. Miyagi asks him to show him what he's been doing. So he goes, show me wax on, wax off. And all of a sudden, it all comes together. So wax on, wax off was a fundamental skill that is now automatic. Paint the fence is a fundamental skill that is now automatic, and he doesn't have to think about it anymore. Paint the fence the other way is an automatic skill. Sand the floor has become automatic as well. So the reaction is there, and this is what we're going to get to in this statistics course. We're going to get to the point where when I ask you to do something, it's going to be automatic. So very importantly, when things get more complicated, and we got to put the whole thing together, right? Back half of the course, when everything has to come together, all those little individual skills have to come together, you'll have enough practice that it's not going to be something you need to think about, and it's going to be automatic. It's going to be, boom, boom, boom. So that's what we're going to do. That's why we do all the practice. And then eventually, once we get to that final exam, instead of sitting there and being scared of that big, scary final exam, it's going to come at you and it's going to be automatic. You're going to kick it in the face. This is going to be you at the end of the semester. This is going to be me at the end of the semester. All right. But it all starts now with, again, getting it to be automatic. So in the first half of the semester, again, we're not going to see a lot of psychology in the first half of the semester. And you might be wondering, why is it that we're doing this? You want to do the cool stuff. We want to look at psychology questions and answer psychology questions. We will get there, right? I'll get you to the mountain. But it starts with all the practice that we're doing. And when you're doing your practice, there's going to come a point where you know it, right? There's going to come a point where you say to yourself, I know how to do a mean. There's going to come a point when you say to yourself, I can calculate variance. This is simple. It is. But we want you to get it quick. We want you to get it automatic. We want you to be fluid in it so that when we have to stack these skills on top of each other to do the more complicated stuff, you don't have to stop and think. It's just boom, 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 boom when I ask you to do those basic calculations. So keep that in mind. I use this as a kind of metaphor for the journey you're going to go through. And again, when it's, a Wednesday night and you're sitting there saying to yourself, I've finished half of this Excel practice sheet. I've got it all correct so far. I'm going to take a breather. Think about Daniel's son and all the cars that were waxed and all the fences that were painted. And I urge you to push that a little bit more, get it to be automatic, because the payoff in the back half of the course is going to be amazing. All right. Remind me not to use any sound effects in this room for the rest of our time here. Okay, so statistical notation. Let's start with our first thing that we're going to practice, our first wax on, wax off task here. So we're going to start off with statistical notation. And statistics uses a lot of general mathematical notation. So you're going to see plus signs, you're going to see divide signs, you're going to see multiplication signs, you're going to see numbers. So we use a lot of the same notation in statistics that we do in mathematics. But we also use some specialized notation that's been used mostly in statistics. And one of the first ones that we're going to encounter is scores for a particular variable are represented by capital X. So they're typically represented by capital letters. Capital X is usually the one that is used most often. So if you have a set of scores, and that's the thing to remember, this is a set of scores, X represents all of those scores. So if I measured the heights of every student in this class, right? If I had the heights, and we have 5'4", we have 6 foot even, we got 5'2", right? We have a whole bunch of heights, 6'4", right? We would have a whole bunch of heights, a whole bunch of measures. I represent all of those with X. So X can stand for 20 measures, 30 measures, 40 scores, 120 scores, however many scores you have, those for a particular variable, for a particular measure, like height, those can all be represented by the notation of X. So that's the first specialized notation that we're going to encounter. The second one is summation notation. And summation of scores is super common in statistics. So much of statistics starts with taking all your scores and adding them together. So summation is used so often in statistics that it got its own special symbol, and it got the symbol for the Greek letter sigma, and that is the symbol right there. So whenever you see a concept in statistics, this is a foreshadowing, whenever you see a concept in statistics and it gets its own symbol, that is a flag that says this concept is super, super important. So this summation, this adding together of numbers, is so important and so often used in statistics that they said, we're going to give it its own symbol. Let's give it this Greek letter sigma, and that's going to be for summation alone. Whenever you see that in your readings, know that that is going to be an important concept. That's an indication of importance in statistics. The other thing that I want you to do is, and again, this is part of that, getting that practice in, when you read your textbooks, when you read your chapters, when you read your homework, and you see these symbols, do not read them as the symbol. So when you see this, do not read it as sigma. Read this, get into the habit of reading it as the sum of. So when you're going through your pre-test and you see that question and it says, what is sigma x? Do not read that as sigma x. Read that as the sum of, and then for x, read that as the scores. So when you see these two notations here, read that as the sum of the scores every single time you come into contact with it. So on your pretest, the sum of the scores. Read it in your mind. You don't have to say it out loud, but in your mind, the sum of the scores. On your homework, the sum of the scores. And I'll be doing that in this class. I will not refer to this ever again as sigma x. This will always be the sum of the scores. And what that's going to do is it's going to ingrain that phrase into your mind so that when it comes to the exam and you see that symbol, your mind will automatically say the sum of the scores. And the reason we want to get there is because to our human minds, the sum of the scores means something. If I told you, here's a bunch of scores, give me the sum of the scores, all of you can do that. If I said, here's a bunch of scores, give me sigma x, what does sigma x mean? It's meaningless, right, to our human mind. So practice that for any symbol that you come across. Make a little note somewhere if you need to, and then when you come across it again in your readings, in your homework, in your tests, always try to read it as what it is. So again, I will only refer to this symbol as the sum of. I will only refer to x as the scores. So while we're going through, I urge you to do the same. And again, it'll just become automatic. When I see this, I don't even think sigma x anymore. I have to remember that it was called sigma when I first started teaching statistics. That's where you want to get to. You want to get to where it's automatically the sum of the scores. All right, so we got summation notation. Next thing we have, that's the first part of new math, right? I promise you we're going to learn 2 new math things. This is your first one. Sigma means the sum of. All right, so there's your first piece of new math. Second piece of new math that we need to do is as a result of introducing this idea of sigma, the sum of, and that is order of mathematical operations. So order of operations, this is a convention that was established so that mathematicians and statisticians could communicate with each other so that you know what part of equation to do first, what part to do second, and so on. Order of mathematical operations is going to be very much like the ones that you already know. So when you have a complicated formula, we start with whatever is in parentheses first. That is then followed up by exponents. That is then followed by multiplying and dividing left to right. So be very careful there. Sometimes students start multiplying and dividing and they just choose arbitrarily where to start. No, you got to choose. You got to start from left to right. That's the convention. That's the way that you do it. So multiplying and dividing, left to right, and then this is the second piece of new math. Then you do summation with the summation symbol. You do summation that is signaled with that sigma symbol, and then finally you end it with any additional addition and subtraction. So this is the order of operations. And just to kind of forewarn you, most students, if they make a mistake, they make it right there. They make it by doing step 5 before doing step 4. So just know, the way I like to think about it is that sigma, that's kind of like a special VIP status for addition. And the reason that I think students get those two confused, because number 4 at its basic level is addition. Step 5 at its basic level is addition. right? So sometimes you're like, well, they're both addition. I'll just do this one and then I'll do this one. No, 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 no. The sigma symbol, think of it as VIP status. Think of it as front of the line, you know, VIP kind of treatment. It's special. It gets to go first. Do any summation that has that sigma summation sign, do make sure that you do that first, because again, that's the convention. All right, so let's see this in action. So if we had this formula that we needed to figure out, this one's got a little bit of everything, so what would we do first? First thing we do is we do anything that's in parentheses. So we would start with x minus 1. Notice, x minus 1. What the heck does that mean? Who knows? But the scores minus 1, all right, that has a better meaning. That has a more clear meaning in terms of what we need to do. And whenever, this is a good time to mention this, whenever you see something like the scores minus 1, what that means is for every single score, you do this to each score. So if you started with 5'4", scores minus 1 is now 5'3". If you started with 6 feet tall, scores minus 1 is now 5'11". And you do it for every single one of the scores. That's what it means by the scores minus 1. So we do what's in parentheses first. Once we're done with parentheses, we then go on to the next step, which is exponents. And we have to apply the exponents to the scores minus 1. And what that means is that whatever you have ended up with, you now use that for the next step. So we took our scores minus 1. Now we take those and we raise those to the exponent 2. All right, so whatever you ended up with, you do it again, because we're not squaring the scores. We're squaring the scores minus 1. We're squaring all of these scores minus 1. After that, we do any multiplication and division. So we do that from left to right. So we start by taking whatever scores we have at this point. We square them. We take whatever scores we have, divide those by 7. Whatever scores end up with those, we multiply by 2, again, because we're going left to right. And then we are finally, after finishing multiplication and division, ready to do summation with that sigma sign. Summation with the sum of. So now when you do your summation, this is the first time you take your scores and collapse them and end up with one number. So until you do summation, you're going to have a bunch of scores. After summation, you got one final score. So we take all the scores, we add them all up, right? Whatever they ended up with after being subtracted by 1, raised to the exponent 2, divided by 7, multiplied by 2, whatever the scores have transformed into, at this point, we add them all up. And then, finally, we end it all by taking that sum of all of our scores and subtracting 1 from it. So I will mention again, this subtracting 1, number 1, you'll be surprised how much subtracting 1 occurs in the natural world. It has something to do with a concept known as degrees of freedom, and we will cover that later on. But it happens a lot. That subtracting 1 happens a lot, but save it for the end, because that summation gets that VIP status. It gets to go first. All right, so enough of this talking about it. Let's get into some actual practicing on this. So we're going to do some summation with Excel in class right now. So if you haven't already, sign into Canvas. In Files, you should see a folder called Practice Excel Sheets. In that folder, you should see the file O2 Practice, January 10th, Introduction to Statistics Summation. There is also O2 Extra Practice, but we're going to be doing O2 Practice right now in class. So it should, awesome. It should look a little bit like this. So we will go over this in just a moment. I'll give a few of you a little bit of time to make sure that you got that loaded. I did announce this before class though, so does anybody not have this open and ready to go? Everybody's got this open? All right, cool. All right, so what do we have here? So we're going to start off here with these scores. So we have participants here, 12 participants, and we have the scores here for one variable, and then we have scores symbolized by y for a second variable, and then we got scores symbolized by z for a third variable. So this could be something like your math ability, your English ability, and your artistic ability as measured by some aptitude test. So you can imagine 12 students got measured for their math, their English, and their artistic abilities. So these are the scores that we're going to use here in question number 1. So before we start doing question number 1 here, these Excel sheets are going to be the way that your exams are given in this course. And we're going to use the same kind of format for the practice sheets and for the exams so that you kind of get familiar with how to fill these in. So in the practice sheets, you'll notice that there are these yellow cells, these yellow highlighted cells. Those are your answer cells. Those are where your final answers need to go. And in the practice sheets, if you scroll down below those, each question, you will see these green answer cells. That is where it indicates whether you got the question correct or you got the question incorrect. So your exams are going to look very much like this. The only difference is they're not going to have this answer key preloaded in, so you won't know whether you're doing, whether you got it correct or incorrect for the exams. But for practice, they're there, they're built in. So if you're practicing this at home, you can just scroll on down and see if you got it correct or if you got it incorrect. All right, so let's start doing this practice here in class. So we have the X scores, we got our Y scores, we got our Z scores. And the first thing we want, you can see in that yellow answer cell, we want the sum of the X scores. So we need the sum of the X scores. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this in Excel. And we're going to put in equals. So we're going to highlight this cell down here. And this will be a nice kind of easy way to do it. So highlight this cell down here. I've already labeled it with the sum of equals. So highlight that cell down there, put in equals. And then the formula for summation is very nice. It's just sum. So formula for summation is sum. One of the nice things that Excel does is it suggests some formulas that you might be thinking of. So when you're writing in sum, it's kind of like an autocomplete. It's kind of saying, oh, do you want this one? Do you want this one? Do you want this one? We're going to use sum. And one of the really nice things about it is that whatever one you click on, it will give a description right next to it of what your formula actually does. So when you put in sum, it says, all right, I got a formula called sum, and it adds all the numbers in a range of cells. That's exactly what we want. We want to add up all the scores. So that's the one that we're going to use. So we got sum here, ready to go. We're going to open our parentheses. Opening your parentheses lets Excel know that you are going to start giving it a whole bunch of numbers to do something with. So we open the parentheses, and then the last thing we need to do is we need to highlight which cells contain the scores that we want Excel to sum. So we can do this a number of different ways. Sometimes I'll use the mouse and I'll just kind of, drag, click on the first one and drag until you have all the cells highlighted. You can also use your mouse keys, shift, and just use your mouse key all the way down. Whatever way that you prefer, there's usually one or two ways to do things in Excel. So whatever way you kind of like, practice that way. Make sure that you get very adept at doing it that way. And then the last thing we need to do is we close those parentheses, let Excel know that we're done giving it numbers. We hit enter, and lo and behold, we have the sum of our X scores. Sum is 518. What we need to do next is we need to get that summation into this cell right here. Now I know that 518 is pretty easy to just enter that in manually and say 518. And you can see that we're scrolling on down, and we got that correct. I do not want you to do this manually for two reasons. Number one, we want to make sure that we do not start entering in human error into our statistics calculations. So you will be amazed when you're doing things quickly, when you're doing things kind of automatically, or not even automatically, when you're paying attention, but you might be in a high pressure situation, like an exam. You would be amazed how much your mind betrays you and starts making stupid little mistakes. And I have seen students do things correctly and then put in 581 instead of 518, right? Just a little twist of a couple of numbers. And I know they can do it, but just as a forewarning, in the exams, it's the answer that counts. And the reason for that is because in real life, I'm getting you ready to do statistics in the real world. In the real world, especially in psychology, the answer is what counts. The conclusion is what counts. Because if you run statistics to take somebody off their medication or to keep them on their medication and you make a mistake, that is a big deal, right? That is a huge difference in the lives of that person. So we got to make sure that we're doing things as exact as possible. And that person who gets incorrectly taken off their medication and has a relapse with their mental disorder, they're not going to be comforted by the fact that you know how to do it. It's just that I didn't get the right answer. They need that right answer. So we're going to mimic that. We're going to reproduce that in this class. We need to get the right answers. Do not enter these things manually because number one, you might make a mistake. Number two, there aren't this time, but there might be hidden decimal places in that answer, right? Decimal places are important because when you're doing multiple calculations, these little round off errors, they build and they build and they build and they build. So just to give you an example of that, has anybody ever heard of chaos theory and how if a butterfly flaps its wings in Africa, there's going to be a storm in Louisiana? Has everybody heard about that? Do you know where that first came about? There was a researcher who was working on a weather prediction program. So it was working on a program that could predict the weather. If you input what the weather is right now, it'll predict what the weather will be later on. And he was just running simulation after simulation after simulation. And this thing had parameters. And he would put in a bunch of different parameters. Like, all right, first parameter, 11.1287. Second parameter, 12.1346. Third parameter, 56.287. Boom, 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 boom. 20th parameter, 62.185. And he would run the simulation, and it would be sunny skies. He would run the simulation again, put in the same numbers, sunny skies. Run the simulation again, put in the same numbers, sunny skies. At one point, he got lazy, ran the simulation, did not put in all the decimal places. Sunny skies went away, and it was a tornado. So butterfly wings flapping, those little decimals, they can accumulate. They can cause that error to just get bigger and bigger and bigger and leads to a completely different outcome. So when we're doing our statistics, as much as possible, we're going to try to carry over as much of our decimal places as we can. And what that means is that instead of manually entering this, we're going to use Excel's equal function. So we're going to type in equals. We're going to go click on where our answer is. And Excel does all the heavy lifting and puts that entire answer into our yellow answer cell. And then we scroll on down, and we see that we got that one correct. All right, let's do the same thing for the sum of y's. So the sum of the y scores. So once again, equals. Let Excel know that you're giving it a formula. Sum is the formula that we're working with. Open parentheses. Let Excel know that we're giving it some numbers. Highlight the numbers. Close those parentheses. Hit enter. And we got the sum of the y scores. Pop that into our yellow answer cell using that equals function. And we see that we got that one correct as well. And then finally, for the z-scores, sum those up equals sum, open parentheses, highlight those z-scores, close your parentheses, hit enter. We get a sum of 716. Pop that into our answer cell using the equals function. Scroll on down, and we can see that we got those ones correct.
Mine is black and white, not that way.
You see? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. All right, cool. All right, so has everybody got these summations? Everybody so far so good? Okay, let's go on to the next one. So we got question number 2. All right, so here we have just the x-scores. We're just going to deal with the x-scores here. But we have the sum of, in parentheses, the scores minus 1. We have the sum of the scores squared. We got the sum of 2 times the scores. And then finally we got the sum of the scores minus 1. So let's do each of those in turn. So much like in the exam, you will have room in the question in these bold boxes where you can do your answers. Do not add columns or subtract, add columns or rows or delete columns and rows from that box. That'll mess up the formulas. But you will have enough room in order to do that. All right, so let's start this one. We want the sum of the scores minus 1. This one up here. So we go through, in this case, because we got multiple operations to do, we go through our list of the order of operations. First thing on the list is parentheses. We check, boom, we got parentheses. What's inside the parentheses? The scores minus 1. So we're going to do that in our first column here. We're going to go the scores minus 1. Now this is going to be, again, much like Danielson doing his waxing. He was doing it in a way that he did it before, in a way that he knew how to do it before. And it was a little bit tedious to do it in those big circles and go wax on and wax off, right? He just wanted to get it done, but Mr. Miyagi was like, no, make the big circles. I know for a fact that there's nobody in here that cannot take 1 away from 56, right? I know for a fact that everybody here could go 55, 34, 70, 89. I know that, but get into the practice of doing it the way that I'm about to show you, because again, I've seen it happen where people are like 15 minus 1 is 14, 55 minus 1 is 54, 21 minus 1 is 22. No, it's not, right? Humans are no good at doing this over and over and over again. So let's get into the practice of doing it using Excel. So we're going to use the equals function. First thing we do is we highlight where our score is. And then the next thing we do is we put minus 1. We hit enter, and Excel does the heavy lifting for us. So one more time, equals, highlight the score, minus 1, we hit enter, Excel does the heavy lifting, equals, score, minus 1, enter. So get that practice in, get that repetition going. Keep working on the ones right here. And next class, when we do our Excel practice, I will show you a couple of shortcuts that show the power of Excel. Let you do this super quick so that you can do the first few and then fill in the rest rather quickly. But for now, do that scores minus 1, equals, highlight the score, and then do that minus 1. And I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to get that done. right, so tapping has mostly subsisted. All right, so if you're almost finished, keep going. But I'll just in the meantime go on to the next step. So we have the scores -1. That was in parentheses. We're done with that. We got all the scores -1. Nothing else to do. There's no exponents, no multiplication or division. Next thing is summation. So much like we did before, we go down to the bottom where all the scores is. We put in equals. The formula is sum. We type that in, open parentheses, highlight those cells, close the parentheses, and we have the sum of the scores -1. Pop that into our answer cell using the equals function. Scroll on down, and we got that one correct. All right, is anybody still working on the sum of the scores -1? All right, on to the next. The sum of the scores squared. So once again, it's the exact same procedure. We come up to this problem. We say, all right, multiple things to do. We need our order of operations. Parentheses, we don't have any. Next step, exponents. We have exponents. So we're going to do this in the next column over. For this one, if you know where to find that little raised exponent there, feel free to put that in. If you don't, just put something that'll let you know what you're doing. That'll let your human mind remember what it was that you put into that column. So just even something as simple as x square will do it for you. So anyways, we need to square all the x's, all the scores, those x scores. So once again, we use equals. We highlight the cell that contains the score. We're not using these scores here because we're not squaring the scores -1. This is a new question. We're squaring the original scores. So we highlight that original score. And then the exponent symbol is that little hat. You can find it on the keyboard. It's on 6. So if you hit Shift 6, you'll get that little hat there. So that tells Excel to raise it to an exponent. Which exponent? The exponent 2. We hit equals, and we get our 56 raised to the exponent 2 equals 3,136. So once again, equals, highlight the original x score, shift 6 to get that exponent. 2 is what we're raising it to, we're squaring it, we hit enter, we get 35 squared. One more time, equals, highlight the score, we highlight 71. Shift 6 to get that exponent. 2 is the exponent we're raising it to, we hit enter, we get 71 squared. And again, this will come next time. I'll show you how to do that all very quickly so that if you need to, if you're dealing with a rather extensive survey and you have 10,000 subjects with 50,000 scores, you won't be here for the next 6 months typing it individually. All right, and you're probably either finished or about to finish, so we'll continue on. Sum of the scores squared. We've done the scores squared. No multiplication. Next thing is summation with the summation symbol. So we have the scores squared. That's where we ended up after that first step. The summation is now going to sum that score squared. So we go equals sum. We now highlight all of the scores that we just squared, close those parentheses, and we get a massive number, which is typical of many calculations in statistics. So 36,654. Pop that into our answer cell using the equal function. Scroll on down, and we see we got that one correct as well. All right, 2 more to go. Next one, the sum of 2 times the scores. So we got the sum of 2 times the scores, same exact procedure, multiple operations to do. We need to make sure we do them in the correct order. First, parentheses. There are no parentheses. Second, exponents. There are no exponents. Third, multiplication and division from left to right. Yes, there is multiplication. So we do that one. We'll pop it into this next column here. And we can just label this for our human brains as 2 times the scores. And once again, we're going to use the equals function. Once again, it's 2 times the original score. This is a new question. So we highlight that original score, and multiplication in Excel is the asterisk. And that can be found by going Shift 8, where you can find the asterisk. And then we need to multiply it by what? We need to multiply it by 2. We hit enter, and 56 multiplied by 2 is 112. So once again, a lot of these you can do just in your mind. 35 multiplied by 2 is 70. 71 multiplied by 2 is 142. But do it. Get that practice in. So once again, equals. Highlight the original score. Shift 8 for the asterisk. 2 is what we're multiplying it by. We hit enter. 35 multiplied by 2 is 70. Next one, equals. Highlight the score of 71. Shift 8 for the asterisk, multiply it by 2 is what we're multiplying it. We hit enter, 71 multiplied by 2 is 142. And again, next time I'll show you how to do that so you can do this rather quickly. But for now, let's get in that practice as well. All right, I can hear that typing dying down, so let's finish this off. So we've done multiplication, and there's no division. We go on to the next step, that is summation with the summation symbol. So we need to sum the scores times 2, so we put in equals, type in sum, open parentheses, highlight those scores, close the parentheses, and we get 1,036. We're going to pop that into our answer cell using the equals function, and scroll on down. And we see we got that one correct. All right, one last one in this little demonstration. We have the sum of the scores minus 1. So once again, we do exactly what we did for everything else. We got multiple operations. We got to do them in order. First thing we look for, parentheses. No parentheses. Second thing we look for, exponents. No exponents. Third thing we look for, multiplication and division. No multiplication and division. Next thing we look for is summation. And this one I've included because this is where, if you make an error, probably where you're going to make the error is by jumping to the minus 1 before doing the summation. Remember your new order of operations. Summation is special. It gets that VIP treatment. So the first thing we need to do in this question is the summation of the scores. So we have our scores right here, and we can do the summation right underneath it. So equals sum, open parentheses, highlight those cells, close your parentheses, and we get a summation of 518. And then if you want to, you can do the summation. So we have the summation of the scores. Then from that, we subtract 1. And if you want to, you can do it directly into the answer cell. You can take the summation minus 1, and we hit enter, and we get 517. And we can see that we scroll down, and we get that one correct. All right, so notice that the order that you do these operations in is extremely important. All right, the summation of the scores minus 1, the summation of scores minus 1 is 506. The summation of the scores minus 1 is 517, right? These are two very different numbers. So be very careful, because the typical error that students will make in the order of operations is to do this when they're supposed to do this. So remember that summation gets special treatment. It gets to go first whenever you're doing summation. Whenever you're doing addition, summation gets to go first. All right, so let's wrap up today. I'm going to just mention a few things. Number one, there is extra practice. Well, there's practice questions still available in this Excel sheet. So again, I highly recommend work through this. If you can solve this one correctly here, that is going to be a great indication that you have a good understanding of these order of operations and using Excel to do your order of operations. So unknown to me, I guess I forgot to delete a bit, but I've already kind of started you here with the scores minus 1. So that's just a little late Christmas gift, I guess, being delivered. So you got the scores minus 1 here, and use the spaces here in the columns to try to figure out the rest of this. If you can do that, that is again a great indication that that you got this order of operations. You're on your way to having a firm basis for that. As always, scroll on down to check your answer. Feel free to do that. And then if you're really feeling frisky, you can head on to the additional questions where things get a little bit more complicated. And this one uses, again, it's the same idea. It's the same order of operations. The only new thing here is occasionally you'll see X and Y together, or X, Y, and Z together. When you see those symbols together, that means multiply. And what you do is you multiply each corresponding score together. So if I saw the scores of X multiplied by the scores of Y, what I would do is I would take the X score for participant 1 and multiply it by the Y score for participant 1. So that's how you read that if you want to give those a try as well. And there's, again, one final question there to kind of super test your knowledge in that. All right, so let's just wrap up this class here. So you have that Excel sheet to practice on to kind of show you just how important this is. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. One second. There we go. All right, so you have your practice sheet, the one that we've been working on right now. There's also a second Excel practice sheet. This is your extra practice sheet. This is where you can get in even more practice. So give it a try, especially if you're trying question number 4 and it might be a little bit too much right now. Go to the extra practice sheets. Start off with some of the more simple ones. Get that wax on, wax off, practice in. Let's make this automatic so that the next time you see sigma, you automatically think the sum of, And when I say sum up the scores in Excel, you don't have to sit there and say, what was that formula again? I think it was, you'll be like, oh yeah, boom, equals sum. So do that. And then I also just want to let everybody be aware of the MyStatLab opportunity to earn 100% on your pretest points. So we have our first pretest coming up. It's going to be due before we meet next class. It's due midnight on the 14th. And give that pretest a try. Do your best. You might not get 100% on a pretest, right? I understand that statistics is difficult. It's challenging. That's why I exist here, so that I can help you understand it. So I don't expect you to do 100% on each of your pretests, but I also will not sabotage your final grade in this course by penalizing you for that. So do the pretest. Try it. It works. It's part of all that practice that we're putting in. But when you finish your pretest, if it just didn't make sense and you didn't get 100% on your pretest, just know that you can still earn 100% on those pretests by doing the MyStatLab. In the MyStatLab study plan, there's the Quiz Me option where you can earn mastery points. So you can find this in the study plan. And if you hit the Quiz Me, or if you take a look at your all chapters, you'll see that each chapter has some master's points, and it'll let you know which one of those you have earned by doing the different Quiz Me's. And if you earn 100% of the mastery points in a chapter, you will get 100% on that chapter's pretest. All right, so don't let the challenge of the pretest and worrying, don't let it worry you about your grade, because they have to be worth something, in order for me to assign them, but you can still get 100% on them by doing your mastery points. So just keep that in the back of your mind. You have a safety net for your pretest. Do your pretest, do your extra practice, get in on that. And next time that we meet, remember, you got your MyStatLab tutorial homework. You have your first pretest being due. Double check your syllabus, poke around in MyLab, know your due dates, and we'll see you all next time.
Okay.